Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, we're looking again at how America has exported abortion around the world and how abortion has been a growth industry around the world. We have with us the Director of Research, Dr. Brian Clowes of Human Life International, who studies these statistics, has gone to the various countries around the world to look at what's really going on. And we welcome him today for his insights. Thank you for being on the show, Brian.
It's a pleasure, Brendan. Thank you for asking me.
Brian, you took a recent trip to Africa, I believe. What did you find out there? What would our audience be interested in knowing with your impressions of what you saw?
Well, it's very interesting, the whole situation. A little background here. There are 10 sources of influence in any country of the world. And what the population controllers have done is they pretty much co-opted, taken over, corrupted the United Nations, which has a 12-digit budget, annual budget. This includes the World Bank, the World Health Organization, UNESCO, UNICEF, United Nations Population Fund. There are 21 major organs of the United Nations. And there are thousands of non-governmental organizations out there, or NGOs, which have also been corrupted or were corrupt to begin with, like Marie Stopes International, the International Planned Parenthood Federation, Center for Reproductive Rights. Others that have been corrupted include CARE International and Doctors Without Borders. And what these two enormous clusters of organizations do, the United Nations and the NGOs, with their hundreds of billions of dollars, is they go into countries, developing countries, and with all of this money, they corrupt the executive branch, the courts, the legislatures, the professional associations, especially the medical and legal professions, the media, and the school leadership. Those are the 6 natural organs of leadership inside any country. And that's what they do first, especially the professional associations, medical and legal. They feed them all kinds of propaganda. The media, they bribe them and corrupt them as well. I've seen it over and over again. And then they ram through these pro-abortion laws. They've done this in over 100 countries of the world, and not one single time did they ever ask the people what they wanted. They shut down debate. I just learned in Tanzania that doctors who stand up against this flood of population control are silenced and they lose their jobs. And it's a very coercive type of process that takes place, and the people really have no say in it.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, I know that during the Obama administration, he was interested in changing the Constitution of Kenya. Can you tell us a little about what happened in that particular process?
Our man on the ground there is Father Raphael Wanjohi. He was fighting it tooth and nail. And once again, the media got involved, and they were propagandizing the people to vote for this Constitution, and they never mentioned that it included abortion in it. And people were shocked afterwards when we told them, you voted for abortion. They said, we never knew. The Obama administration actually bribed the government with a $20 million grant, saying, this is going to be a good thing. We'll give you $20 million to help push through this Constitution. And if that's not a blatant meddling in the affairs of other countries, I don't know what is. But their number one goal to meet the Millennium Development Goals of the United Nations by 2015 is to legalize abortion in every country of the world, and they really don't care how they do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, now, I had a young lady on here who worked for Family Watch International, and she thought that it was a bottom-up approach in the sense that they have these young aides that are brought over to be influencers of the younger culture, but she happened to notice that they all have the same lines. So she was saying, well, how come all these different countries, they're all using the exact same lines? Do you see a bottom-up approach, too?
No, there's not a bottom-up approach because they do not care what the people think. The only people that they might reach is a set of carefully trained little pet young people they send around to talk to the other young people, but 99% of it is the top-down approach, because that's where the power is. They can do what they want, and the people have no say in it. So what they do with these young people is they either lavishly wine and dine them, or either outside the country in London or Washington, D.C., or they have conferences where they propagandize them. And these big international NGOs and governmental organizations like DFID, which is the Department for International Development of the United Kingdom, advertises in papers for local people to act as their mouthpieces. So I saw in a paper myself in Malawi that they're offering approximately 20 times the salary that a young lawyer could make anywhere else in the country to come and represent DFID and get trained to push population control throughout your country, because you can't have white faces telling Malawians to have fewer children. The racism will become quite evident. So they hire local native Malawians to do their dirty work for them.
Mm-hmm. What would be your prescription to changing all this? Would you say defund the United Nations? Would that be a good start?
Yeah, these people would dry up and blow away if they didn't have any funding. The United Nations used to have a good mission, but primarily what it's doing now is homogenizing belief all over the world. It's trying to. It used to be that you could go into a place, an African country, with guns and tanks and bombs and take over like that. But the Senegalese novelist Humberto Kane talked about the colonization of the mind. And so we're colonizing the minds of Africans and Latin Americans and Asians by making them think like Americans, like Canadians, like Europeans, and we're colonizing their bodies with chemicals so they have fewer children. This is the entire program, because if you look at what Nixon said and what he did back during his presidency, he had Henry Kissinger promulgate National Security Study Memorandum 200, or NSSM 200, which was implications of worldwide population growth for United States security interests. And right in there it says we are not going to be trying to hold down the population of this country to improve their standard of living. We're doing it so we can get our hands on their natural resources. And this is carried on throughout, the Carter administration, Clinton, both Bushes, and now Obama. So the point here is we're trying to hold down the population, especially of Africa, so that we can get our hands on their natural resources.
Wow, that's something. And why is Bill Gates getting involved? Population controllers think we have limited resources and the planet is too crowded. Why did Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation get involved?
Why are they getting involved? Well, they had this London Summit on Family Planning this last July the 12th, in which Melinda Gates promised to raise $4.2 billion to get 120 million more women on contraception in order to save lives. And some of the people there think like, well, what vaccines are to child mortality, improvement in child mortality, contraception is to maternal mortality. But this is not true. You legalize this kind of thing, and you start flooding the country with contraception, and you see all kinds of abuses take place. The main partner of the Gates Foundation at that London Summit on Family Planning was the Department for International Development in Great Britain, which gave $261.4 million to the Indian sterilization program, even though it was shown there were widespread abuses. And the reason they're doing this is to hold down greenhouse gases, they say in their report. So it doesn't matter that women are being herded up like cattle and forcibly sterilized. It's for the greater good of the planet. So nothing is beyond these people, especially when they dump millions and millions of dollars worth of contraception on Africa. We'll find that instead of the old colonialism, we now have chemical slavery, where if you get 120 million women on these things like Depo-Provera, Norplant, Jadel, IUDs, and the birth control pill, that's $60 billion in profit for Big Pharma every single year.
Wow, that's incredible, the amount of profit that the chemical companies would make, or the pharmaceutical companies, I guess would be the. And let me ask you about the whole aspect of condoms. In the past, the pro-life community has talked about, well, viruses go right through the porosity of a condom. And now we've had a study from a guy from Harvard recently here in the Boston area that said, well, it's not necessarily porosity, but it appears that if you have more condoms, you have more activity, and therefore you have more disease or abortion. Is that true, or what has been your experience in this regard?
I don't like to talk about the porosity of condoms because they might leak, they might not. Even if they do leak, they're only going to be, leaking a few HIV, so it's not a big threat. And it's just a distraction because when you start arguing about the porosity of condoms, one person says, I have all these studies that say they do. The other person says, I have all these studies that say they don't. Where the real danger lies is if you look at contraceptive technology, the Family Planner's Bible, which is issued every 2 years. It lists 15 major studies of hundreds of thousands of condoms that show they break, tear, and slip off 7% of the time, or 1 out of 14 times. And this is where the great danger lies. I've been to a dozen African countries, and I've got photos of about 50 different condom billboards, and not one time do they warn you that these things break or tear or slip off 1 time out of 14. And so we find that if you do the study of the African countries, and you look at all of these countries and their HIV AIDS rate as specified by UNAIDS, you'll find that the more people use condoms, the more HIV AIDS you're going to have. If you plot the percent of population of Catholics and Muslims in a country, now in Africa, Muslims don't use condoms, period. Very few do. And Catholics also follow the church teaching. So you'll find that countries north of the Sahara have about a 1 in 8,000 HIV infection rate because it's all Muslim. And then you have countries where there are a lot of Catholics and Muslims. You'll find maybe 1 or 2% HIV infection rate. But as you have less and less Catholics and Muslims, more and more people using condoms, where they're pushed very hard, you'll find HIV infection rates in Botswana, South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, Namibia, in the southern part of Africa, ranging up to 38%. That's more than 1 out of 3 adults with HIV/AIDS. The AIDS wards over there, if you visit them, are full of people who faithfully used condoms every time they had sex. And they can't understand, why am I dying? I use condoms every single time. Then you look at the case of Thailand and Philippines, which have about the same population. They're about the same area of the world. The Philippines is 90% plus Catholics, and the government there kept condoms out because they know they don't work. Where Thailand instituted a 100% condom use program. My son lives in Bangkok over there, and there are condoms everywhere. And so what do you find? Where the condoms are used all the time in Thailand, 1 in 90 adults are infected with HIV. In the Philippines, it's 1 out of 22,000. So there's your empirical scientific evidence that condoms do not stop AIDS. They help to spread it.
And yet they're setting up, aren't they setting up sites and passing out condoms liberally wherever they can?
Oh, yeah. Even in Uganda, where they had a 26% HIV infection rate back in '87, which was the highest in all of Africa. Then President Museveni, Museveni instituted an ABC program, abstain from sex before marriage, be faithful after, and if you absolutely have to, use condoms. But the condoms were severely discouraged. Their HIV infection rate went from 26% all the way down to 4% 4 years ago. But now it's going up again because the population controllers cannot afford to let this example stand. So they are strongly attacking Uganda. They're flooding the place with condoms, and in the last 4 years, the HIV infection rate has gone up to 8%.
Wow, very interesting.
So there's pretty solid evidence there that they depend entirely on ideology and not science for their policies.
Let me give you a supposition. What if, say, Romney and Ryan were to get elected and were to severely defund? I know that Ryan has a 100% rating by National Right to Life Committee from the pro-life voting record. What if they were to defund all programs associated with reproductive health? The money is allocated to the UN. Is that possible, or is that money is fungible, so therefore you can't stop it from going into certain programs?
I think politically it would be virtually impossible to defund the UN because they are so heavily entrenched. But you can target, like we did a number of years ago, the United Nations Population Fund. A particular agency cut off their funding, USAID's reproductive health funding, and so on. When you do that, and they just shut down their reproductive health clinics, their illegal abortion clinics, and all of the other operations around the world. But the key to shutting all of this down is to shut down their funding, which will be an absolutely huge job, because $98 billion has been spent on population control in the last 15 years. Even if we cut off funding to the United Nations and to all of these groups, it would be a tremendous step in the right direction, because the United States contributed $36 billion out of that $98 billion. But you could expect, very anti-life governments like those in Great Britain, Sweden, Finland, Japan, Australia, Canada to pick up some of the slack. But if we could defund these big organizations and just let these countries be and stop meddling in their affairs, I think we go a long way towards eliminating the image of the ugly American. When I was in Tanzania, I taught to people all the time, and they were getting very, very angry about having their, the African love of family, life, and God being consistently undercut by these big organizations. They're just getting really fed up with it, and they don't like Americans because of it.
Wow. And what about all of the ancillary issues? For instance, I talked with a post-abortive woman here, Vera Faith Lord, in a show earlier in the last month, and she was talking about the psychological and emotional problems. Do you see that being manifested in these countries by women or their families with the post-abortive culture? Has abortion, for instance, gone up dramatically in these countries, and does it have those psychological and emotional effects also?
Well, a lot of this is considered really private stuff by Africans, and so it's hard to get data. But in places like the Philippines, where they have the Rachels, they're the post-contraception and abortion and sterilization women, they have a lot of bad stories to tell. These population controls, for instance, in Davao City, in the central part of the country, in the entire region of Davao, they had a safe motherhood program where they said, we'll give everybody free pelvic examinations. And while they had the women on the table, they put IUDs into them. And so these women didn't even know they have IUDs. And a lot of them years later started to get impacted. A lot of women died and had severe infections. The population controllers don't care. Their only objective is to hold down the population. And abuses like this happen all over the world constantly.
Is there any pro-life human rights council that can, bring this to the attention, or is it that countries don't even want to listen to us? Or
they don't want to listen. They don't care. Like DFID, I mentioned before, Department for International Development, fully knew about the forced sterilization program in India and still funded it. It's just a bunch of, treating these women like cattle. The United Nations Population Fund is many times co-located with family planning offices in China. They help to implement and run the Chinese forced abortion program. And in fact, the former head of the UNFPA, United Nations Population Fund, Nafis Sadiq, lavishly praised the Chinese forced abortion program. They know what's going on over there, and they fully support it.
Wow, that's really something. We've had recently Chai Ling's group here and we're going to have her one day, we hope, on the show. She's now in Boston. She was at Tiananmen Square, and she has an organization called All Girls Allowed that deals strictly with China and trying to save girls in China. But it's you know, a drip and a drop. It's compared to what's really going on over there regarding forced abortion. And do you see an increase of, with this effort, of coercion from family members to have abortions like we have in America? About 64% of all abortions, 64% of all pregnancies are coerced or forced upon the pregnant woman. Do you see that kind of activity going on worldwide?
Well, I don't know about worldwide. I really don't. You see the stories fairly frequently, but they're only anecdotal. If you look at Human Life International's abortion violence website at abortionviolence.com, you can see that every year 25 to 35 women in the United States are murdered because they refuse to have abortions. This is something that the pro-abortionists simply cannot afford to acknowledge it. It's one of the loudest skeletons rattling in their closet. They simply don't care. No pro-abortion group has talked about these women getting slaughtered because they refuse to have abortions. If it happens in the United States, you know it's happening all over the world. It's just inevitable. The filthy, greedy, pro-abortion mentality, the I'm first type mentality, it's just naturally appeals to the evil and base instinct in human beings. So sure, it's going to be worldwide.
Now, I know in the town that you work out of, I believe it's Front Royal, Virginia.
Yeah.
We have the Population Research Institute, and they say that the population controllers have been foisting myths upon governments in various countries. Can you tell us what some of those myths are, that how they get away with forcing this on everybody?
Well, the primary myth is that abortion will improve maternal health, and it will drop the morbidity or mortality rate. In other words, less women will die. When in reality, most women die not from illegal abortions, but from not having proper prenatal care, not having attended childbirth in a sterile type of atmosphere, and not having funding for surgical problems like obstetric fistula. So you'll save many more women by funding safe prenatal care, safe motherhood, safe deliveries, and afterwards following up the women. But they would instead want to legalize abortion as all they care about. The number one myth is that hundreds of thousands of women die of abortion in various countries. They did that in the United States. Bernard Nathanson's 5 to 10,000, when the actual number was about 39. In Brazil, they said 400,000 women die of illegal abortions, when the actual number was about 200. In Trinidad and Tobago, they said 350 die every year. So where'd you get that number? And they said, well, they just waited some months until one woman died of an illegal abortion. And they said, okay, that's one per week times 7 hospitals times 52 weeks, that's 350 a year. So whenever you ask them where these numbers come from, they always have really vague estimates or personal experience or hospital statistics. And when you say, let me take a look at your statistics, they always refuse because they're lying. Every single country I know of where they come up with a number like this is always a gross exaggeration. So we say, how do you tell when a population controller is lying? You watch their lips. When their lips are moving, they're lying.
Well, Brian, we've kind of come to the end of our show. Is there anything else that our folks should know other than your website?
Yeah, you should, if you really care about this kind of thing, eventually, if we don't try to save the babies of foreign countries, we are going to wind up sinking ourselves. Because if we have a completely pro-abortion world, the future is going to be extremely bleak. So I'd urge people there to support groups like CFAM, Catholic Family and Human Rights, based near the United Nations, Human Life International, HLI.org, Population Research Institute, Steve Mosher's group. Go to these websites, get involved, and pray for us and donate and just help us out in any way you can, because we are outnumbered and outspent 10,000 to 1. We need all the help we can get.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Clowes, for being on today's show.
Thank you, Brendan. I appreciate the opportunity.
And folks, we hope you learned a lot today about what's going on internationally. This man is perhaps one of the most informed men in the world regarding the abortion avalanche that's occurred over the last 20, 30, or 40 years here in America and across our entire globe. Well, thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life.